The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Westbrook Athletic Complex, casting everything in that crisp, clinical light that Saturday mornings always seem to have. Corinne Ashford sat in the third row of the bleachers, her legs crossed at the ankle, her Hermes bag positioned just so on her lap. She wore white, always white on game days. It was her thing. Her brand, as her daughter Meredith, a brand strategist, would say. The white tracksuit from Lululemon, the white Prada sneakers, the white gold Apple Watch. Even her nails were a pristine French manicure, though that had required a Thursday appointment at Vidal Sassoon, her favorite salon, the one where they always had her usual fruit water waiting. Her son, Tyler, was 12, 7th grade, already on the elite competitive basketball travel team, the Westbrook Vipers. The best team in the region, coached by a man named Derek Paulson, who had once been recruited by a college program before a knee injury ended that particular dream. Derek had poured all his remaining competitive fire into coaching youth basketball, which meant he was absolutely relentless about cuts, about performance, about the constant evaluation of every player on his roster. Tyler had made the team last year, his first year of elite basketball. Corinne had been ecstatic, devastated if she was being honest with herself when he didn't make it the first time he tried out. That was over a year ago. She'd cried in her Range Rover in the parking lot for 45 minutes while the other mothers pretended not to notice her red eyes when they left. This year, Tyler was one of the best players on the team. Not the best, Derek wasn't one to hand out superlatives easily, but close. Maybe top 3. Corinne had watched every practice, every tournament, every game. She had spreadsheets. She tracked his minutes, his three-point percentage, his assist-to-turnover ratio. She'd even learned the difference between defensive schemes, something she'd never understood when her own daughter played sports in high school. But that was the thing about being a parent of an athlete. It consumed you. It became your identity. Corinne had always been ambitious. She'd been a commercial real estate broker before she quit to raise her kids, which was a decision that now, 15 years later, sometimes felt like jumping off a cliff into a waiting pair of arms that had maybe let her down. But channeling all that ambition, all that competitive fire into her son's athletic career, that felt productive. That felt like she was building something. Corinne, save me a seat. She looked up to see Jennifer Watts approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Jennifer was one of the other elite mom parents, though not quite in Corinne's league. Jennifer's son, Marcus, was competent but not exceptional, a good all-around athlete but not a star. Corinne felt a twinge of something, not quite pity but close, when she looked at Jennifer's son. That's what normal was. That's what most kids were. Of course, Corinne said, moving her bag and straightening up slightly. Did you get the sugar-free vanilla latte? I'm watching my weight. You always are, Jennifer said, sitting down with a small laugh. It was meant to be friendly, but Corinne heard the edge in it, just a tiny edge. I got you the usual. Thank you. Corinne took a sip and turned her attention to the court, where the warm-ups were just beginning. The Vipers in their navy blue and gold jerseys, the opposing team, the Riverside Rapids in black and red. The Rapids were a decent team, though not elite. They'd beaten the Vipers once last season in a tournament, and that loss still bothered Corinne more than she wanted to admit. She spotted Derek on the sideline, clipboard in hand, already talking to his assistant coach. Derek was intense. He had that lean, wired quality of someone who'd never quite come to peace with the end of his own athletic career. His voice during practice could carry across the entire facility. He was demanding, sometimes to the point of cruelty. Once, during a game, he'd yanked a 10-year-old off the court and told him he was playing like a statue. The kid had cried. His mother had complained to the league. Nothing had happened. Corinne approved of Derek's intensity, though. That was how champions were made. The game began. The Vipers came out strong, executing Derek's half-court offense with crisp passes and good movement. Tyler, playing shooting guard, had the ball on the perimeter. He was a solid athlete, not explosively athletic, but smart. He played with good fundamentals, which was Derek's obsession. No flashy dribbling, no unnecessary moves, just fundamental, effective basketball. He took a shot from three-point range. It swished. Corinne felt something release in her chest. A warmth, a rightness. She didn't cheer excessively, that wasn't her style, but she smiled and nodded, taking another sip of her coffee. The first half went well. The Vipers were up 12 points by the end of it. Tyler had 8 points, 3 assists. Good performance, though not spectacular. Corinne thought he could have been more aggressive. She'd mentioned this to Derek once casually after a game. Derek had given her a look, patient but firm, and said that Tyler's role was to be a facilitator and play solid defense, not to be a volume scorer. Karen had agreed, because of course Derek was right, but privately she thought Tyler was capable of more. The second half began. The Rapids adjusted their defense, double-teaming the Vipers' power forward more aggressively. This opened up space on the perimeter. Tyler got the ball several times and fired away at three-pointers. He made one, missed two. Then came the moment. Tyler was dribbling up the court, pushing pace. He was being guarded by a kid named Trevor who played for the Rapids, bigger, more athletic than Tyler, with that easy confidence of kids who have been told their whole lives that they're special. Trevor reached in, maybe defensively, maybe not. It was borderline. Tyler lost the handle, the ball skittered away, and a Rapids player scooped it up for an easy, fast break. The referee, a middle-aged man named Tom Caldwell, who'd been officiating youth basketball for 20 years, didn't blow the whistle. No foul. Karen felt her jaw tighten. It was a foul. It was clearly a foul. A reach-in on a dribbler driving the lane. That was basketball 101. Every parent on the bleachers had seen it. Karen was sure of it. She turned to look at Jennifer, whose face was neutral. That infuriated her more. "That was a foul," Karen said quietly. "It was borderline," Jennifer offered. "It was clear." The game continued. The Vipers lost possession and the Rapids scored on the fast break. 12-point lead down to 10. No big deal in the grand scheme of things. These things happened in youth sports. Bad calls happened. Kids had to learn resilience. But Karen's chest was tight. She could feel her pulse in her throat. It happened again 10 minutes later. Tyler was off the ball, cutting through the paint, and a Rapids defender extended her arm into his path, clearly impeding his movement. Another no call. This time, Karen stood up. "Are you serious?" she said, loud enough that several people turned to look at her. Jennifer put a hand on her arm. "Karen, sit down." Karen sat down, but she was vibrating. She could feel it now, that familiar heat starting to move through her system. The unfairness of it. The fact that her son was being treated differently. The fact that this Tom Caldwell, this referee, didn't seem to understand that he was interfering in something that mattered. The Vipers lost the game 37-34. Tyler had finished with 10 points and 4 assists. A respectable game. In the grand scheme of a 12-year-old's life, nothing. But it didn't feel that way. After the game, Karen waited while Tyler gathered his things and talked to Derek and the other coaches. She watched Derek put a hand on Tyler's shoulder and say something to him that made Tyler nod. Karen felt a flash of something, envy maybe. The idea that Derek had some special wisdom about basketball and life that she didn't. That Tyler listened to Derek in a way he didn't always listen to her. "Let's go get lunch," she said when Tyler finally walked over, still in his uniform, sweat dried in patches on his chest. "Can I go with Marcus and his mom?" Tyler asked. "We were going to get smoothies." "No," Karen said. She hadn't planned to say that. It just came out. "We're having lunch together, just us. We need to talk about that game." Tyler's face fell slightly. "The calls were bad. That's not on me." "I know, honey. I know the calls were bad." She put an arm around him as they walked toward the parking lot. "But that's exactly why we need to talk, because the only thing you can control is you." She was aware on some level that she was pushing this harder than was healthy. But there was a narrative she'd constructed, you see. The narrative was that Tyler was special, that he had real potential, that with the right guidance and support he could be an exceptional player. Not just good, exceptional. And that meant not letting things like unfair officiating slow down his development. It meant extra training. It meant analysis. It meant a parent who stayed vigilant. It meant, in some ways, turning every moment into an opportunity. As they drove home in Karen's Range Rover, with the heated leather seats on low and a podcast about sports psychology playing softly in the background, Tyler stared out the window. "The ref made bad calls," Karen said, hands on the steering wheel at 10-2. "But I want you to understand something. In basketball and in life, you can't control the refs. You can only control your effort and your performance. Did you give 100% today?" "I think so," Tyler said. "Did you or did you?" There was an edge to her voice now. "I did," Tyler said, and something in the flatness of his tone made Karen feel a small twinge of something she pushed down immediately. "Then you have nothing to be upset about. You played well, and next game we'll play a better team with better officiating, and you'll show them what you're capable of." She believed this. She really did. But she also knew, somewhere deep in her consciousness, in the place where her own ambitions and disappointments lived, that she was transferring something onto Tyler that maybe wasn't entirely fair. Something about proving things, about not being overlooked, about mattering. But that was the thing about self-awareness. It didn't stop you from doing the things you knew you were doing wrong. The week that followed was normal enough. Karen drove Tyler to strength and conditioning on Tuesday and Thursday. She watched from the viewing window as he did agility drills and lifted light weights, pushing himself slightly beyond what felt comfortable. She attended practice on Wednesday, something Derek had eventually asked the parents to stop doing after the first year. "It makes the kids anxious," he'd said, not looking at Karen specifically, but very much looking at her. But Karen usually found an excuse to be at the facility during practice anyway. She would sit in the lobby, checking emails, keeping one ear open to what was happening on the court. Friday was the next game. It was an away game against Riverside's crosstown rivals, the Riverside Youth Elite, a bigger, more developed program. Their facilities were newer, their coaching more established. Karen had driven past their complex once and felt a small flutter of inadequacy, the kind of feeling she usually went shopping to cure. The game was at 4 p.m. Karen packed Tyler's extra water bottle and his lucky socks and drove him across town. The facility was indeed newer, with better bleachers and an actual scoreboard system instead of the hand-operated one at Westbrook. Karen felt the familiar anxiety that came with playing away. Would the official be fair? Would they favor the home team? She positioned herself in the stands and waited. The same pre-game warm-ups, the same intensity from Derek, the same feeling in her chest that felt like hope mixed with dread. This game had a different referee, a younger man, maybe in his 30s, with a look of concentration on his face. Karen felt a small relief. Maybe this would be better. The game itself was close. Both teams were well matched. Tyler played solid, unspectacular basketball. He made good passes. He played decent defense. He took a few shots that didn't fall. Then, with 6 minutes left in the second half, the Vipers down 5, Tyler got the ball on the wing. He started to drive. A defender stepped in front of him, extending her arms. It was a flagrant foul, clear contact on the arm while he was in the act of shooting. The referee didn't blow the whistle. Instead, Tyler's shot was blocked. The ball turned over, and the other team scored on the fast break. Karen stood up. "Are you kidding me?" People looked at her. Jennifer wasn't there this game. Her work had called her away, so there was no one to put a gentle hand on her arm. "That's a foul," Karen shouted. "That's a clear foul." The referee turned and looked at her. His expression was patient but firm. "Ma'am, you need to sit down." "It was a flagrant foul," Karen continued. "You're letting them beat up on our players." "Karen," Derek's voice came from the sideline, sharp but controlled. He didn't turn around, but she heard the warning in it. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. She could feel the eyes of other parents on her. She recognized a couple of them, other elite moms from her daughter's middle school. She wondered what they were thinking, probably that she was unhinged, probably gossiping already about how Karen Ashford lost it at a children's basketball game. The Vipers went on to lose by 8. Tyler finished with 7 points and 4 assists. After the game, Derek pulled Karen aside. "We need to talk," he said. They stood in the hallway outside the gymnasium, the sounds of the team packing up echoing behind them. "That was a terrible call," Karen said before he could speak. "You saw it, that was flagrant." "It was a close call," Derek said. He had kind eyes, she'd always noticed that about him, kind but firm. "And yes, maybe it should have been called, but Karen, I need you to understand something. The way you're reacting, it's not good for Tyler. It puts pressure on him that he doesn't need." "I'm advocating for my son," Karen said. "I know you are, I respect that, but there's a line and I think you're getting close to it." Derek glanced back toward the gym. "These are 12-year-old kids. They're supposed to be having fun. Tyler loves basketball, but he's also starting to get anxious. I've noticed it. He's anxious about losing. He's anxious about disappointing you," Derek said, and his voice was so gentle it almost made it worse. Karen felt something hot and sharp move through her chest. "That's not fair." "I'm not saying it as a judgment," Derek continued. "I'm just asking you to think about it. Because if you keep going down this road, if you keep making every game about fighting with refs and proving something, Tyler might start to hate this game." Karen didn't say anything. After a moment, Derek nodded and went back inside. In the car on the way home, Tyler was quiet. "You played well," Karen said. "No, I didn't," Tyler said. "I was nervous. I knew you were mad at the ref, and I got nervous." Karen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I wasn't mad at you." "I know, but I still got nervous." She wanted to say something. She wanted to explain that she was only pushing because she believed in him, because she saw his potential, because she knew what it took to be special. But something in Derek's words had lodged in her, a splinter of something true that she couldn't quite remove. So instead, she said nothing. The following week, there was another game, home game, same time as the first one. Karen considered not going. She sat in her car in the driveway on Saturday morning and seriously considered staying home. But that felt like abandonment. That felt like not showing up for her son. So she went. This time, it was a different referee again. An older woman, probably in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked like she'd been refereeing youth sports since the beginning of time. Karen felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this woman would see things clearly. The game started. The Vipers came out strong. Tyler was playing well, confident, aggressive. He took a shot from three-point range and swished it. Karen smiled, allowing herself a moment of pure parental pride. Then, about 5 minutes into the first half, something happened. Tyler was driving down the lane, and a Rapids defender, a girl about his size, extended her arm just slightly. It was a minimal contact. The kind of thing that happened 100 times a game. The kind of thing that refs usually let go. The older woman referee blew the whistle immediately. "Foul on number 12, she called out, pointing to the Rapids player. Tyler looked surprised. The Rapids player looked furious. Her mother stood up in the stands. "That wasn't a foul," she shouted. "She barely touched him." Karen felt a strange sensation, a mingling of vindication and something else. Something that felt uncomfortably like satisfaction. The call had been wrong. She knew it had been wrong, but it had been wrong in favor of Tyler, and she'd felt something release in her chest when it happened. The next time Tyler drove and made contact with a defender, actual, obvious contact this time, the older woman didn't blow the whistle. She let it go. Karen felt her frustration rising, but this time it was different. This time it wasn't about fairness. This time she was angry at the inconsistency, the randomness. The fact that her son's fate seemed to rest on the whims of these referees who didn't know him, didn't understand his potential, who might ruin everything with a single bad call. By the third quarter, Karen was tense. She'd gotten coffee at halftime and drunk it too fast, and now her hands were shaking slightly. The Vipers were up by 2, and the game was tight. Tyler threw an errant pass that was intercepted. He made a mistake on defense and fouled out for a moment in his mind. You could see it in his face. He got back on the next possession and played tighter, but Karen could see the change in him, the anxiety. Derek had been right. Tyler was anxious. And it was because of her. This thought came to her suddenly, clearly, like a message transmitted through glass. It was because of her that Tyler was anxious. The game continued. The Vipers won by 4. Tyler had 12 points and 5 assists, his best game of the season. After the game, Derek found Karen again. "That was great to see," he said. "Tyler looked relaxed out there. That's when he plays his best." Karen nodded. She wanted to say something, to explain that she understood now, that she could see the connection between her intensity and Tyler's anxiety. But the words didn't come. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it," Derek said. "What do you want for Tyler? Like, really, what do you want?" "I want him to be happy," Karen said, "and I want him to reach his potential." "And what if his potential is just to be a really solid player who loves the game?" Derek asked. "What if he's never going to be elite? What if his path is different than you imagined?" Karen felt something tighten in her throat. "Then I want to make sure he did everything he could to get there." "I hear you," Derek said. "But Karen, I think you need to also consider, maybe he did everything he could just by being himself. Maybe he doesn't need you to optimize him. Maybe he just needs you to be his mom." He said it kindly, but it landed hard. That night, Karen lay in bed next to her husband, Michael, who was already asleep. She thought about Derek's question. What did she want for Tyler? The honest answer was complicated. She wanted him to be special because she wanted to be the mother of someone special. She wanted him to be successful because she needed evidence that her sacrifice, quitting her career, putting her own ambitions on hold, had meant something. She wanted him to be exceptional because being ordinary felt like failure. But she also loved him desperately. And when she was quiet enough to hear her own thoughts clearly, she knew that she was slowly, deliberately taking something away from him. She was taking the joy. She decided, lying there in the dark, to do better. The next game was the following Saturday. Corinne went, but she made a decision. She would sit quietly. She would watch her son play. And if a ref made a bad call, she would accept it as part of the game. She would not shout. She would not argue. She would not let her own need to control outcomes poison her son's experience. It was a good decision, a healthy decision, a decision that made sense. It lasted about 35 minutes. The game started well. The Vipers were playing against a team called the Central Division Warriors, a newer program with less pedigree than the Vipers but more money and better facilities. Their coach was a man in his 40s named Steve Morrison, and he was running a more modern system, more three-point shooting, more pace and space. The Warriors came out strong. The game was immediately closer than Corinne expected. At the end of the first quarter, it was tied at 12. The second quarter was where things started to fall apart. The Warriors began to expose something about Derek's system. It was a bit predictable. Derek was a traditionalist. He believed in fundamentals and half-court offense. The Warriors, with their modern system, were finding seams in the defense. By halftime, the Warriors were up by 8. Corinne sat quietly, taking deep breaths. Just watch, she told herself, just watch and enjoy. The second half began, and the Vipers made an adjustment. They started to play a tighter defense, denying the Warriors' best shooter, trying to slow the pace. It worked, at least partially. By the end of the third quarter, the Vipers had cut it to 3. Tyler was playing well. He'd scored 10 points already, and he was facilitating the offense nicely. He was calm, collected. He looked happy. Then, with 5 minutes left in the game, it happened. Tyler had the ball on the wing. He was setting up a screen with the power forward, and he was getting ready to cut to the lane. The Warriors' point guard, a kid named Anthony who was clearly the Warriors' best player, quick, athletic, with a beautiful stroke, stepped in to defend. Tyler started to cut. Anthony extended his leg just slightly, not even making the motion of checking him, just extending his leg. Tyler's foot caught on Anthony's leg and he stumbled, falling hard to the ground. The ball came loose. The referee, a man Corinne didn't recognize, maybe late 40s, with a look of careful impartiality on his face, said nothing. He didn't blow the whistle. Corinne stood up. She would tell herself later that she stood up to cheer for her son getting the ball back or to call out encouragement. But the truth was more complex. The truth was that she stood up because she felt something snap inside her. "That's a trip," she shouted. "He tripped him." The referee looked up at her. His expression was patient but firm. "Ma'am, sit down or I'll ask you to leave." Corinne sat down, her heart pounding. But the damage was done. The Warriors had the ball now, and Tyler was getting up slowly, dusting himself off. She could see the moment his expression changed. The moment he understood that his mother had just drawn attention to him in a negative way. A few minutes later, the Warriors scored a layup. The lead was back to 5. The Vipers called a timeout. Derek gathered the team. Corinne strained to hear what he was saying. She caught fragments. "Defense, stay tight. You've got this." The game resumed. The Vipers made a three-pointer. Warriors scored. Vipers scored. It was back and forth, the momentum shifting like a tide. With 2 minutes left, the game was tied. The Vipers had the ball. Derek called a play. It was a pick and roll, the power forward setting a screen for Tyler, who would attack the lane and either score or find the cutter. It was a basic play, one they'd run 100 times. But the Warriors' defense was tight. Anthony was staying with Tyler, overplaying the drive. The power forward didn't get good positioning on the screen. Tyler was forced to pick up his dribble. For a moment he stood there, trapped, the ball in his hands, Anthony's hand in his face, the clock winding down. He threw up a desperate shot. It hit the back of the rim and bounced out. Warriors ball. The Warriors scored a layup with 40 seconds left. Now the Vipers were down 2. They had one more possession. Derek called a timeout. Corinne watched him talking to Tyler, putting a hand on his shoulder, saying something that she couldn't hear. Tyler nodded. He looked determined, nervous but determined. The Vipers inbounded the ball. Tyler got it on the wing. 30 seconds left. The Warriors' defense was suffocating. The Vipers moved the ball around the perimeter looking for an opening. With 10 seconds left, Tyler caught the ball at the three-point line. Anthony was right there, hand up, contesting heavily. Tyler jumped and released the shot. It left his hands beautifully. The arc was perfect. It looked for a moment like it was going in. But the basketball gods are fickle. It hit the front of the rim and bounced away. Someone got the rebound. The clock ticked down. 5 seconds. 3-0. The Warriors won. Corinne was already standing as the final buzzer sounded. She was standing and the Vipers were walking off the court, their shoulders slumped, their heads down. She was standing and she could see Tyler's face, the disappointment, the frustration, the weight of losing. And she was standing when Derek walked past her, and their eyes met for just a moment, and she saw something in his expression that felt like pity. That night at dinner, no one spoke much. Tyler pushed his food around. Michael talked about work. Corinne's daughter, Meredith, was at a friend's house and texted that she'd be late getting home. After dinner, Corinne found herself in her home office, scrolling through her phone. She pulled up a video of the game that had been recorded and posted to the league's app. She watched it again. The trip that wasn't called. The jump shot that didn't fall. The moment when her son's potential slipped through his fingers. She watched the part where she'd stood up and yelled about the trip. She watched the other parents' expressions. She saw Mrs. Watts, who was back at the game this time, give her a look that was somewhere between sympathy and concern. And she saw, more than anything else, the moment when Tyler's face changed after her outburst. The moment when he became less loose, less confident, less himself. Derek was right. She was putting pressure on him that he didn't need. She was making his basketball into her basketball. She was making his potential into her redemption. She made a decision right then and there to stop. To really stop. Not just surface level, let me sit quietly stop, but deep level, let me examine my parenting stop. She would be different, she would be better. She would not go to the next game, she decided. She would let Tyler play without her there, without her judgment, without her need for him to be exceptional hovering over him like a shadow. It felt like the right decision. It felt like a turning point. And then, exactly 5 days later, came the email. It was from the league director. There was going to be a hearing about officiating. Several parents had lodged complaints about fairness and consistency. The league was going to review game footage. Derek, as a coach, had been asked to submit a statement. Corinne opened the email thinking it was about the game against the Warriors, about the trip that wasn't called. But it wasn't. The email was about something she'd said. Apparently, there had been a recording of the game from 2 weeks prior, and in that recording, Corinne could be heard shouting at the referee. The volume and intensity of it had caught the attention of another parent, who'd reported it to the league director. They were going to have an officiating review meeting in 2 weeks. All coaches, involved parents, and league officials would attend. Corinne felt her stomach drop. She read the email 3 times. It was professional, neutral, but the implications were clear. She'd crossed some kind of line. She needed to talk to Derek. She found his number and called him, and he answered on the second ring, his voice cautious when he recognized her. "Hi, Corinne, what's up?" "I got an email about a league meeting," she said, "about officiating." There was a pause. "Yeah, I got one too." Derek, she stopped. What was she going to say? That she hadn't meant to, that she was sorry. Both were true, but they also felt insufficient. "Corinne, listen," Derek said, and his voice was kind again, which somehow made it worse. "I think this might actually be a good thing. I think you might need to talk to someone about this. Not in a judgment way, but you're clearly struggling with something." "I just want what's best for Tyler," she said. "I know you do," Derek said. "And I think the best thing for Tyler is for you to figure out why you need him to be exceptional so badly." After they hung up, Corinne sat in her office in the dark. The meeting was in 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she would have to face the league officials and explain herself. She would have to acknowledge what she'd done. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, Corinne made another decision. She would prepare for the meeting, but before that, before she did anything else, she would talk to Tyler. She would tell him that she was sorry, not for believing in him or wanting him to be good, but for making it about her, for putting her own needs on top of his, for trying to live out her own unfulfilled ambitions through him. She would tell him that she loved him, Not because of what he could accomplish on a basketball court, but because he was hers. It was a decision that felt terrifying and necessary in equal measure. And she was gathering the courage to go find him and have that conversation when her husband, Michael, appeared in her office doorway. "Tyler's upstairs crying," he said quietly. "He said something at school today and his friends laughed at him, and now he's really upset." Corinne's heart rate spiked. What did he say? Apparently, he said something about the refs not liking him in his last game, and someone said, "Your mom is crazy, that's why they don't like you." And he got really upset. Corinne felt something break inside her. She stood up and went upstairs. Tyler was in his room, door closed. She knocked softly. "Can I come in?" Tyler didn't answer, but he also didn't say no, so Corinne opened the door. Tyler was on his bed, face to the wall. His shoulders were moving slightly, which meant he was still crying. Corinne sat down on the edge of the bed, not touching him yet, just being near him. "I heard what happened at school," she said. Tyler didn't turn around. "I'm sorry," Corinne continued. "I'm so sorry, baby. This is my fault, not yours. Do you understand that? Your friends were being mean, but they were being mean because of me, not because of anything you did." Tyler turned around. His face was blotchy, his eyes red. He looked so young suddenly, impossibly young. "Why are you like this?" he asked, and his voice was small and broken. "Why do you have to yell at the refs?" Corinne felt tears come to her own eyes. "Because I'm scared," she said. "Scared of what?" "Scared that if I'm not pushing all the time, you'll fail, that you won't reach your potential, that I'll have wasted everything." She paused. "But honey, that was wrong of me. Derek was right. I was putting too much pressure on you." "I don't want pressure," Tyler said. "I want to play basketball because it's fun." "I know," Corinne said, "and I'm going to do better, I promise you." She pulled him into her arms, and he let her, and they sat there in the darkness of his room while Corinne tried to figure out how to fix something that she'd broken. But the damage, she was starting to understand, might already be done. Part 2, the pressure point. The 2 weeks leading up to the league meeting were perhaps the most difficult of Corinne's life. And she meant that literally, more difficult than her divorce from her first boyfriend, more difficult than finding out she couldn't naturally conceive and having to pursue IVF, more difficult than the year her mother had been sick. Because this was about seeing yourself clearly, and what Corinne saw when she looked clearly was a person she didn't particularly like. She attended Tyler's next 2 games and sat quietly in the bleachers, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to not react to every call, every moment of perceived injustice. It was harder than it should have been. There was a call in the 3rd game where the ref missed an obvious travel, and Corinne had to physically bite the inside of her cheek to keep from shouting. Tyler played okay, he didn't play great, he looked different, she thought, less confident, like he was playing scared. She also did something she should have done weeks earlier. She went to talk to Dr. Patricia Weinstein, a therapist who was recommended by a friend. Dr. Weinstein's office was in one of those converted brownstones in the wealthy part of town, with tasteful furniture and soft lighting. "So you've been yelling at youth basketball referees," Dr. Weinstein said during their 2nd session, and there was something about her direct, non-judgmental approach that made Corinne feel like she could be honest. "Yes," Corinne said, "and I'm disgusted with myself about it." "Why?" Dr. Weinstein asked. The question was simple, but Corinne found herself struggling to answer it. Because isn't it obvious? Because she was being an asshole, because she was embarrassing her son. But Dr. Weinstein was waiting. "Because," Corinne said slowly, "it's not really about the refs." "What is it about?" Corinne was quiet for a long time. "It's about the fact that I gave up my career to raise my kids, and sometimes I feel like my life is meaningless now. And Tyler's accomplishments, they were starting to feel like evidence that my sacrifice meant something." Dr. Weinstein nodded. She didn't look surprised. Probably, Corinne thought, because people said variations of this constantly. "And your daughter," Dr. Weinstein said, "Meredith, she's a brand strategist." "Yes." "Does she accomplish things?" "Of course." "Does that give your life meaning?" Corinne understood the trap. She's an adult. She accomplishes things for her own reasons. And Tyler is a child. He plays basketball because he enjoys it, correct? "He used to," Corinne said quietly. The sessions continued. Corinne did the homework Dr. Weinstein assigned. She journaled about her own childhood and her own parents' expectations. She discovered things about herself that she'd rather not have discovered, like the fact that her mother had been disappointed when she quit her job, had made comments about wasting her potential, and that Corinne had internalized this as a deep shame about her choices. She had put that shame onto Tyler. The night before the league meeting, Corinne couldn't sleep. She lay in bed next to Michael, who was snoring softly, and thought about what was going to happen. She would attend the meeting. She would face Derek and the referee and the league officials. She would probably be asked to apologize publicly. And maybe she deserved that. Maybe a public apology was what was needed to show Tyler that she was serious about changing. The meeting was held at the league's administrative office, a small suite in a strip mall off the highway. It was not glamorous. It was slightly depressing, actually. The kind of place where youth sports bureaucracy happened: plastic chairs, outdated pamphlets, a smell of old coffee, and Xerox machines. The officials assembled in a conference room. There was the league director, a woman named Susan who was probably in her mid-50s and had that weary look of someone who dealt with angry parents constantly. There was the referee Tom Caldwell, the one from the first game. He looked nervous. There were a few other parents, other coaches, actually. Derek and Steve Morrison, the Warriors' coach, and there was Corinne. No other parents had been asked to attend, which made Corinne feel simultaneously relieved and more exposed. "Thank you all for coming," Susan said, sitting at the head of the table. "We're here today to discuss some concerns that have been raised about officiating consistency and parent behavior at recent games." She opened a binder and pulled out several sheets of paper. Corinne recognized them as complaint forms. There had been official complaints filed. "I want to be clear," Susan continued, "that the primary concern here is not intentional bias from our referees, but rather inconsistency in the application of rules. However, we've also had some concerns raised about behavior from parents that may be affecting how officials do their jobs." Susan looked at Corinne. Corinne's mouth had gone dry. "Ms. Ashford," Susan said, "you've been the subject of 2 complaints. One from Tom here regarding your behavior at the Warriors game, where you yelled at him for not calling a foul. And another from a parent who was present at an earlier game, where there's audio recording of you making several outbursts directed at the officiating." Tom Caldwell looked uncomfortable. Corinne realized he hadn't wanted to complain about her. He'd probably been forced into it. "I want to address this directly," Corinne said. She had prepared what she was going to say, but now that the moment was here, everything she'd prepared seemed inadequate. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have yelled at the refs. I shouldn't have questioned their calls from the stands. And more importantly, I've realized that my behavior was putting inappropriate pressure on my son and affecting his performance and his enjoyment of the game." "Your son plays for Derek, correct?" Susan asked. "Yes." "Derek, has Tyler's performance been affected by his mother's behavior?" Derek shifted in his seat. "I don't want to throw Corinne under the bus," he started, "but yeah, I have noticed Tyler seems more anxious when Corinne's at the games where she's been expressing frustration with calls. And I've been concerned about the long-term impact on his love of the game." Corinne felt her throat tighten. "I've also noticed," Steve Morrison added, and Corinne was surprised he was volunteering information, "that some of the other parents are using Corinne's behavior as an excuse for their own behavior. I've had complaints from my own parents who were at games where Corinne was yelling, and they said, 'Well, if the Viper's parent is doing that, why can't I?' So it sets a tone." Corinne nodded slowly. She understood. She'd been the bad example. "Here's what I'm going to propose," Susan said, looking at Corinne. "You're going to take a break from attending games for the remainder of the season. That's 6 more weeks. During that time, you're going to work with a sports psychologist to understand what's driving your behavior and to develop healthier ways of supporting your son. And you're going to write an apology letter to Tom here and to the league, explaining your behavior and committing to change." Corinne heard herself say, "Okay, I agree." "Additionally," Susan continued, "I'm going to implement a new policy for the league. Parents who behave like you did will receive 1 warning. A second incident will result in being banned from the facility for the remainder of the season. We need to create an environment where our young athletes can play without unnecessary stress." It all felt deserved. It all felt right. But when Corinne left the meeting, she felt hollowed out. That night, she told Tyler about the ban. She didn't tell him about the conditions or the apology letter or the psychologist. She just said, I'm not going to be at your games for the next 6 weeks. I'm going to stay home. Tyler's response was complicated. There was relief in his face, she could see it, but also something else, something that looked like guilt. Is it because of what I said, he asked, about you yelling at the refs? No, baby, Karen said. It's because I yolled myself I needed to do better, and part of doing better is not being at the games where I might make you anxious. But what if I want you there? Tyler asked. Karen felt tears prick her eyes. Do you want me there? I don't know, Tyler said, which was probably the most honest thing he could have said. Over the next 6 weeks, Karen attended her sessions with Dr. Weinstein every week. She did the homework. She wrote the apology letter which she submitted to the league. She also wrote Tyler a letter explaining her behavior, apologizing for the pressure, and telling him that she loved him unconditionally. She didn't go to his games. Instead, she made a point to do other things with him that weren't related to basketball. They went to a movie. They went hiking. They went to get ice cream and just talked about school and friends and the things he cared about. He was less guarded with her, she noticed, less performance-oriented. They could just be. And slowly, something shifted. About 4 weeks into her break, Tyler came home from school and said, I made 3-pointers in practice today. That's great, Karen said. She was about to ask for details to start analyzing his performance, but she stopped herself. Did you have fun? Yeah, Tyler said, it was fun. That was enough. By the end of the 6-week period, Karen felt different. Not healed, she didn't believe in healing in 6 weeks, but different. She'd started to understand her own anxiety. She'd started to see Tyler as a separate person, not as an extension of her own unfulfilled dreams. The day she was allowed to attend games again, she almost didn't go. She felt the familiar pull of anxiety. What if she fell back into old patterns? What if her presence alone was enough to make Tyler nervous? But she went. She sat in her usual spot in the bleachers in her white tracksuit and Prada sneakers with her Hermes bag. She looked like the same Karen, but inside she was trying to be different. The game was against the Riverside Rapids, one of the teams they'd played before in the season. Derek's half-court offense had evolved slightly, incorporating more three-point shooting. Tyler played well, not spectacular but solid, confident. There was a moment when the referee made a call that was close, maybe even wrong. Karen felt her instinct rise, that old familiar need to shout, to protest, to make her presence known. Instead, she took a breath, she acknowledged the impulse, and she let it pass. After the game, Derek came over to her. You didn't say anything, he said. No, Karen agreed. How are you doing? Better, Karen said, still struggling sometimes, but getting better. I can see it, Derek said, and Tyler can see it too. He's different, more confident. Karen nodded. She wanted to feel victorious, but instead she mostly felt relieved. The season continued. Tyler's performance remained solid. He wasn't going to be the next LeBron James. Karen had accepted this, though it had taken effort. But he was a good player, and more importantly, he loved the game. Toward the end of the season, the Vipers were set to play in a tournament out of state. It was a big deal, a chance for the team to compete against elite programs from other regions. Derek had been building toward this tournament all season. Karen was allowed to attend, and she did. But something was different. At one point during the first game of the tournament, Derek had pulled all his starters for a breather, a strategic decision since the game was not close, the Vipers ahead by 25. Tyler was one of the players pulled. As he walked to the bench, he caught Karen's eye. And he smiled. Not a smile that said, please validate me. Not a smile that begged for approval or evidence that he'd impressed her. Just a smile. A kid's smile. Happy to be alive, happy to be playing, happy to be here. The tournament lasted 3 days, and it was in a city about 4 hours away. Karen had rented a hotel room for herself and Michael. Tyler was staying with the team at a different hotel. Derek's policy was that the players bonded as a team during tournaments, away from family. This had initially bothered Karen. She'd wanted to be able to see Tyler in the evenings, to have family dinners, to maintain control over his preparation and rest. But Derek had explained that the bonding was part of the experience, and that Tyler needed to learn to function independently, to be part of a team that wasn't his immediate family. So Karen had acquiesced, and over the course of the tournament, she'd realized that stepping back, really stepping back, not just pretending to step back, was allowing her to see something she'd missed before. Tyler actually had friends, real friends, not just other kids on the basketball team, but actual friendships, with their own in-jokes and dynamics that had nothing to do with basketball. She'd watched him at the hotel Friday night, hanging out with two other players, all of them laughing about something, and she'd realized that she didn't know what they were laughing about. She didn't know what Tyler's life was like outside of basketball. It was humbling. The Vipers played their first game on Saturday morning. They won, easily. Tyler contributed 8 points and 4 assists. Derek kept him in the game less in this tournament than he had in the regular season, rotating players, giving everyone minutes. That afternoon, while Tyler was resting at the team hotel and Michael was napping in their room, Corinne found herself with time on her hands. She walked around the city, looking in shops, getting coffee at a local cafe. And she found herself thinking about her own life. Not Tyler's life, not through the lens of his accomplishments, but her own. What did Corinne Ashford want? Not what did she want for her children, what did she want for herself? It was a question she hadn't seriously asked in 15 years. She'd quit her job in commercial real estate because her first pregnancy had been difficult, and then Meredith had been born, and it had felt right to stay home. She'd stayed home for Meredith's entire childhood, watching her grow, being present, and that had been good. But then Meredith had gone to school, and Corinne had slowly, almost without noticing it, turned her attention to Tyler and his basketball career. She'd filled the empty space in her life with his schedule, his training, his potential. And then when that wasn't enough, she tried to control his outcomes, tried to make his potential her redemption story. Sitting in a coffee shop in a strange city, Corinne realized that she had no redemption story. She was not a hero. She was just a person who'd made some choices, good and bad, and was living with the consequences. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the story wasn't about whether you were special or exceptional. Maybe the story was just about whether you showed up, for your kids, for yourself, for the people you loved. That night, the team had a group dinner. The players and their families were invited to a casual restaurant near the tournament venue. Corinne went with Michael and Tyler. Watching Tyler with his teammates and Derek, Corinne noticed something she'd been too busy to observe before. Tyler was not the best player on the team. He wasn't even necessarily top 3. There was a kid named Jackson who was clearly going to be special. He had that kind of athletic ability and court sense that came along once in a while. There was another kid named Marcus who was bigger and stronger than Tyler, who could dominate inside. Tyler was solid. He was a good all-around player. He was dependable and coachable and had a good attitude. He was, in other words, the kind of player that made teams work. Not the star, but the cog that allowed the machine to function. And watching him at dinner, laughing with his teammates, talking about the next game, Corinne realized that this was enough. More than enough. This was a good life for a 12-year-old. The next day, the Vipers lost their second game. It was a close game, came down to the final possession. Tyler had played well. He'd been aggressive on offense, which was something Derek had been encouraging him to work on. In the locker room afterward, Corinne heard Derek talking to the team. She was outside the locker room, waiting for Tyler, and Derek's voice carried. "You guys played really well," Derek was saying. "You played hard, you played together, and you lost to a better team today. That happens. That's basketball. The question is, what are you going to do with that experience? Are you going to quit? Or are you going to come back tomorrow and play even harder?" She heard the kids mumbling affirmations. "I'm proud of every single one of you," Derek continued. "Not because of whether you win or lose, but because of how you conduct yourselves, because of the way you support each other, because you're learning something bigger than basketball." When Tyler came out, he looked disappointed but not devastated. "Good game," Corinne said, pulling him into a hug. "I missed a three-pointer at the end," Tyler said. "That could have tied it." Corinne felt the old instinct rise, to analyze, to talk about his shot mechanics, to discuss how he could improve. But instead, she said, "Derek told me he was proud of you." Tyler nodded. He said that after every game, whether we win or lose. "That's because he means it," Corinne said. The third day of the tournament was the consolation bracket. The Vipers had lost to a better team, so now they'd be playing for third place. It was a lower-stakes game, and Corinne noticed Derek approaching it differently. He was trying different lineups, giving players different responsibilities. Tyler played more than he had in the other games. He played the entire second half, and he was excellent, not putting up huge stats but playing smart, unselfish basketball. He was the quarterback of the offense, and he made everyone else better. The Vipers won. After the game, as the kids were celebrating in the locker room, Derek found Karen in the stands. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said. Karen's immediate instinct was panic. What had she done? Had she said something inappropriate? Had she violated some condition of her probation? But Derek was smiling. "I've been meaning to say this for a while," he continued. "I think you've made real progress. I can see the difference in Tyler, and I can see the difference in you. You're being a better parent, which means he's becoming a better player and a better person." "Thank you," Karen said, and she meant it. "I also want to say," Derek continued, "that I think you should consider going back to work." Karen was taken aback. "Really?" "Yeah," Derek said. "I think you've got a lot to offer, and I think you'd be happier if you were doing something that challenged you, that was just yours. Not Tyler's basketball, not your kids' accomplishments, but something that was about you." It was such a simple suggestion, but it landed heavily. Because Derek was right. Karen had spent so much time with her identity wrapped up in her children that she'd forgotten what it was like to have her own identity. That night, over dinner with Michael at a nice restaurant while Tyler was at the team hotel, Karen brought it up. "Would you mind if I started looking for a job?" she asked. Michael looked at her for a long moment. "Would you be happier?" "I think so," Karen said. "Then I think you should," Michael said. "I think you've been lost for a while, and I've been waiting for you to find your way back." It wasn't accusatory, it was just true. Over the next month, Karen started exploring her options. She reached out to some old colleagues in real estate. She looked at online courses in marketing. She considered going back to school. And slowly, her identity began to expand again. It began to include things beyond mother of Tyler, the basketball player. Tyler's season ended a few weeks later. The Vipers didn't make it to the state championship. They lost in the regional semifinals to a team from the city with more resources and better genetics. Tyler had played well in that game, but not well enough to change the outcome. For the first time, Karen didn't feel devastated about the loss. She didn't think about what Tyler could have done differently. She just thought, well, that's the end of the season. At the end of season banquet, Derek handed out awards. Best Defensive Player, Most Improved, Coach's Award. Tyler didn't win any of the major awards, but Derek did pull him aside and say something to him privately. Karen never found out exactly what he said, but Tyler looked proud. After the banquet, Tyler came over to Karen. "Derek said he wants me to come to his summer camp," Tyler said. "That's great," Karen said. "Do you want to go?" "Yeah," Tyler said, "but it's because I want to, not because you want me to." "I know," Karen said, "and that's the best reason to do anything." As the spring turned to summer, things began to settle into a new rhythm. Tyler went to Derek's summer camp. He worked on his skills, but he also hung out with his friends and played video games and did all the normal summer things that kids did. Karen started interviewing for a part-time marketing consulting position with a real estate firm. She was nervous about the interviews. It had been 15 years since she'd been in a professional setting, but she found that the skills hadn't abandoned her. She was still good at her job. She got offered a position. Part-time, flexible hours, good pay, she accepted. It wasn't a redemption arc exactly. It wasn't the story where Karen quit sports parenting and became enlightened and everything was perfect. Life was messier than that. There were still moments when she felt anxious about Tyler's development, still moments when she had to check herself. But overall, things were better. And then, about 2 months into Karen's new job, something unexpected happened. Michael had a heart attack. It was a Thursday afternoon. He was at work and he felt chest pain. He drove himself to the hospital, which in retrospect was incredibly stupid, but he was a man who didn't like to make a fuss. By the time Karen got to the hospital, he'd been stabilized, and the doctors were telling her that he'd been lucky. It was a minor heart attack. He would be fine with medication and lifestyle changes. But it was a wake-up call. Michael was 52. He'd been sedentary for years. His diet was terrible. He was stressed. In the hospital room with Michael sleeping, Karen sat and thought about how fragile everything was, how quickly things could change, how the things that seemed important, Tyler's basketball career, her own redemption story, were actually just details in a much larger, more uncertain narrative. When Michael woke up, Karen took his hand. "I don't want anything to happen to you," she said. "I know," Michael said. "I don't want anything to happen to me either." Michael had to take a month off work. During that time, Karen found herself being the primary parent again, but this time with a different lens. This time, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just trying to be there. She made sure Michael ate well. She made sure he rested. She drove Tyler to practices and camps. She worked her consulting job from home. She did what needed to be done. And somewhere in the midst of this, she realized that she'd actually arrived at the place she'd been trying to reach all along. She was just a person living her life. Not a special person, not a failure, not a redemption story, just a person. A mother, a wife, a professional, flawed, trying her best, doing the work. The incident at the referee at the basketball game had become local folklore. Karen was aware of this. She would occasionally run into someone at the grocery store or at a networking event and see the moment of recognition on their face, the moment when they realized she was that Karen. It was humbling. It was also a constant reminder of who she'd been and who she was trying not to be. But about 9 months after her initial meltdown, something happened that forced the issue more directly. Karen was at work. She'd taken on more hours and was now doing nearly full-time consulting work for the real estate firm when she got a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Karen Ashford?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes," Karen said cautiously. "This is Susan Marcus. I'm a producer with a production company in Los Angeles. I'm reaching out because we're interested in developing a documentary series about youth sports culture and parental involvement. I've been following your story, and we think you'd be a compelling subject." Karen's first instinct was to hang up, but she didn't. "What kind of story?" she asked. "Well, the incident at the basketball game went semi-viral on social media," Susan explained. "We've been researching parent behavior in youth sports, and your case is interesting because you actually worked on changing your behavior instead of doubling down. We'd like to document that transformation." Karen felt her stomach turn. "I'm not interested in being in a documentary." "I understand that," Susan said, "but I'd encourage you to think about it. There's an important conversation to have about parent culture in youth sports. And your story, your willingness to change, to acknowledge your mistakes, that's powerful. That could actually help other parents." Karen said she would think about it. She hung up and sat at her desk, trying to process. The idea of being featured in a documentary made her want to vomit. And yet, there was something in what Susan had said that resonated. That night at dinner, Karen mentioned the call to Michael. "You should do it," Michael said immediately. "What? No, absolutely not." "Why not?" Michael asked. "You're ashamed of what happened. A documentary might be a way to come to terms with it, to show other people that change is possible. Or it might be a way to dredge up something I've spent the last 9 months trying to move past," Karen said. "Those things aren't mutually exclusive," Michael said. Over the next week, Karen found herself thinking about Susan's offer more than she wanted to. She thought about it during her consulting meetings. She thought about it during Tyler's basketball games, which she now attended with a much lighter touch. She would go, she would watch, she would cheer, and then she would let it go. She even talked about it with Dr. Weinstein. "What's your instinct?" Dr. Weinstein asked. "My instinct is to hide," Karen said, "to hope that people forget about it." "And your better self?" Karen thought about it. "My better self thinks that maybe Michael is right. Maybe talking about it would be valuable, not for me, but for other people who might be struggling with the same things." "The question then," Dr. Weinstein said, "is whether you're ready to be that vulnerable in a public forum." Karen wasn't sure, but she called Susan back. The documentary project took about 6 months from initial contact to filming. Susan and her production company, they were a smaller indie operation with a few documentary credits under their belt, wanted to document Karen's life, her son's life, her coaching relationship with Derek, her sessions with Dr. Weinstein, who agreed to be interviewed, and the broader landscape of youth sports culture. It was invasive. There were cameras in the house, microphones at basketball games, interviews that lasted hours. Karen had to relive the moment she'd shouted at the referee, to watch footage of herself, to confront her own behavior in a way that was deeply uncomfortable. But there was also something cathartic about it. One day, during an interview, the producer asked Karen, "Do you regret what you did?" Karen was quiet for a long moment. "I regret the impact it had on my son. I regret embarrassing him. I regret the pressure I put on him. But I don't regret the experience itself because it forced me to change. It forced me to look at myself." "Do you think you would have changed without the incident?" Susan asked. "I don't know," Karen said honestly. "I think I might have continued down that road for years, getting worse before I got better. The incident forced a reckoning." The documentary was set to premiere at a film festival in the fall. It was called The Game We Play, and it focused on three parents in different youth sports contexts: Karen in basketball, a father in Little League baseball, and a mother in competitive swimming. Each story was different, but they all touched on the same themes: the way parental ambition could distort a child's joy in sports, the way competition could turn toxic, the way adults sometimes used children as vehicles for their own unfulfilled dreams. Karen watched the rough cut about a week before the premiere. She cried during parts of it. She cringed during other parts, particularly the footage of her yelling at the referee, which was presented in slow motion and from multiple angles, making it even worse. But overall, she thought it was honest, and honest was what was needed. The night of the premiere, Karen attended with Michael and Tyler. Derek had also been invited and attended. Dr. Weinstein had been invited and attended. The theater was maybe 80% full, not packed, but respectable for an indie documentary at a regional film festival. Karen sat in the back in the dark and watched her own failure played out on screen. It was both worse and better than she expected. The documentary didn't make her out to be a villain, but it didn't make her out to be a hero either. It presented her as a flawed person trying to do better, and that, Karen realized, was the most accurate representation. After the film, there was a queue, and Karen was invited to sit on a panel with the other two parents featured in the documentary. She was terrified. The questions were good, some were harsh. One audience member asked, "Don't you think it's irresponsible to put your parenting failures on display for the world to see? Isn't that just a form of narcissism, making your mistakes about you?" Karen appreciated the question, because it was something she'd wrestled with. "I think there's a valid concern there," Karen said. "But I also think that if my mistakes can prevent someone else from putting their child through the same thing, then it's worth it. I'm not here to be a martyr or a hero. I'm here to say I was wrong, I changed, and here's what that looked like." Another audience member asked, "Has your relationship with your son improved?" Karen looked at Tyler, who was sitting a few rows back. He was looking at his phone, trying to seem like he wasn't listening, but she could tell he was paying attention. "Yes," Karen said, "not because of the documentary, but because I put in the work, because I went to therapy, because I made myself vulnerable enough to change." When the panel ended, people lined up to talk to the parents. Some offered support. One woman pulled Karen aside and said, "I recognized myself in you. I've been doing the same thing with my daughter. Watching this made me realize I need to stop." Karen gave her Dr. Weinstein's name. Driving home that night, Tyler was quiet in the back seat. "You okay?" Karen asked. "Yeah," Tyler said. "It was weird seeing all that stuff, but I'm glad you did it." "Really?" "Yeah," Tyler said. "Some of the kids at school were probably going to find out about it anyway, and now they'll see that you were trying to fix it, that you weren't just crazy. You were a normal person who made some bad choices." Karen reached back and squeezed his hand. The documentary screened at several festivals over the next year. It didn't become a massive hit, but it found an audience. It was reviewed in the New York Times. It aired on a streaming service. It was nominated for an Independent Documentary Award. And slowly, the narrative around Karen started to shift. Instead of being the Karen who yelled at the referee, she became the parent who was honest about her mistakes and changed. This created a different kind of pressure, actually. Now she had to live up to the image of someone who'd actually changed. She had to be vigilant about not falling back into old patterns. She had to be consistently better than she had been because people were watching. But it was a more productive kind of pressure. About a year after the premiere of the documentary, Karen was invited to speak at a parent education seminar about youth sports culture. She gave a talk about her experience, about how she'd bottomed out, about how she'd sought help, about what healthy parent involvement looked like. After her talk, a man approached her. He was maybe in his early 50s, with gray hair and a worn look about him. "I just want to thank you," he said. "I watched your documentary and I recognized myself completely. I've been doing the same thing with my kid, pushing too hard, making it about me instead of about them. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm trying to do better." Karen felt something catch in her chest. "That's wonderful," she said. "Keep going, it gets easier." "Does the relationship with your son improve?" he asked. "Yes," Karen said. "It does, not overnight, but yes." These interactions happened more often as time went on. Parents reaching out, saying they'd watched the documentary, that it had helped them, that they were making changes. And Karen realized that maybe Derek had been right. Maybe there was something valuable in her story. Not because she was special, but because her mistakes were ordinary. Because they were the mistakes that a lot of well-meaning parents made. 2 years after the initial incident at the basketball game, Karen was at a Vipers game. Tyler was in 9th grade now, and he was still playing on the elite team, though Derek had warned her that as kids got older and more serious players dropped out, the competitive landscape would shift. Tyler was no longer one of the best players on the team. He was solid, but there were kids who were clearly going to have more serious athletic futures. Karen had made peace with this. Tyler had also made peace with it. He still loved basketball, but he was also developing other interests. He'd joined the debate team. He was taking advanced math classes. He was becoming a whole person instead of just a basketball player. Watching him play, Karen noticed something interesting. He played differently now. He played with confidence but not arrogance. He played to win, but he also played for joy. He made his teammates better, and he seemed genuinely happy when they succeeded. Derek pulled Karen aside after the game. "I wanted to tell you," Derek said, "that Tyler came and talked to me. He said he's not sure he wants to keep playing elite basketball next year. He's thinking about joining the school team instead, just for fun." Karen felt a moment of the old instinct rise, the panic that came with the idea of her son not pursuing excellence. But she recognized the instinct, acknowledged it, and let it pass. "What did you tell him?" Karen asked. "I told him that was his decision," Derek said, "and that whatever he decides, I'm proud of him for being honest about what he wants. That's more important than any of the basketball." 5 years after the incident at the basketball game, Karen was sitting in a coffee shop near her office, reviewing a proposal for a new real estate development project. She'd been working full-time for the past 3 years, and she'd been promoted twice. Her career was back on track, maybe better than it had been before. She had a meeting in 10 minutes with a client, so she gathered her materials and headed back to the office. As she was walking, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Tyler. "Mom, I made debate team captain. Coach asked me today." Karen smiled and texted back a congratulatory message. Tyler was 17 now. He'd stopped playing elite basketball in 9th grade and had joined the school team where he played for fun and exercise. He discovered that he loved debate and he was good at it. He'd given a speech at a state competition that had gotten standing ovation. He was in AP classes, he was involved in student government, he was becoming the person he wanted to be. And Karen had managed, mostly, to let him do it without inserting herself into every decision. It wasn't perfect. She still had moments of anxiety about his future, still had to catch herself before offering unsolicited advice, still sometimes imagined alternate versions of his life where he'd pursued basketball seriously and become an elite player. But those moments were fewer and further between. At the office, Karen had a meeting with a developer who wanted to build a mixed-use complex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. She presented her analysis of the market, the competition, the potential for returns. She was confident, professional, and knowledgeable. This was her world. This was her expertise. After the meeting, her colleague Sarah pulled her aside. "You were great in there," Sarah said. "That was a pitch-perfect presentation." "Thanks," Karen said. "I've learned that if you want something done right, you have to be willing to put in the work to master it." It was a statement that meant more than Sarah probably realized. That night, Karen came home to find Michael in the kitchen cooking dinner. Michael had recovered well from his heart attack and had actually become something of a fitness enthusiast. which was ironic given that his near-death experience was what got him started. "Tyler texted me about debate team captain," Michael said as Karen set down her bag. "I saw," Karen said. "I'm really proud of him." "So am I," Michael said. "I'm also proud of you." "Why?" Karen asked, somewhat surprised. "Because you let him find his own path," Michael said. "That's harder than it sounds." After dinner, Karen sat down to work on something that had become a regular part of her life. She was mentoring other parents who were struggling with similar issues: overparenting, over-involvement, the projection of unfulfilled ambitions onto their children. She didn't charge for it. It was volunteer work, a way of taking her experience and trying to transform it into something useful. She was working on a response to an email from a mother named Janet who'd said, "I feel like I'm losing my mind. My daughter is 11, and she plays soccer at the elite level, but I keep thinking about how she could be better, how she's not working hard enough, and I'm scared that if I don't push her, she'll just be average. And I know that sounds crazy, but I can't shake it." Karen typed out a response. "Dear Janet, I understand that fear completely. I lived in that fear for years, but I want to gently suggest something. That fear is coming from you, not from your daughter. Your fear of being average, of your child being ordinary, of your life meaning something less. That's the thing you need to address. Here's what I learned. Your daughter doesn't need you to make her exceptional. She needs you to believe in her. She needs you to love her regardless of what she accomplishes. She needs you to be emotionally available in a way that you can't be if you're constantly evaluating her performance. I'm not saying don't support her. Of course, support her. But support the whole person, not just the athlete. Ask her about her dreams, not just her goals. Listen to what she actually wants, not what you imagine she should want. It's hard work. Therapy helped me. So did community. So did being honest about my own disappointments and finding ways to address them that didn't involve my children. You can do this, and your daughter will be grateful. Best, Karen." She sent the email and sat back. Over the years, since the documentary, Karen had received hundreds of messages like Janet's. Parents who recognized themselves in her story. Parents who were scared, who were pushing too hard, who needed permission to back off. She tried to respond to as many as she could. The next morning, Karen was working at her office when she got a call from someone named Tom Caldwell. She recognized the name immediately, the referee, the one she'd yelled at in that first game years ago. "Hi, Karen," he said cautiously. "This might be weird, but I wanted to reach out to you personally." Karen's stomach tightened. "Hi, Tom, this is unexpected." "I know," he said. "I watched your documentary recently. I didn't see it when it came out, but it came to streaming services and I stumbled upon it. I wanted to tell you that I think you're a brave person for being so honest about what happened." "That's kind of you to say," Karen said carefully. "I also want to tell you something," Tom continued. "That incident, when you yelled at me during the game, it affected me more than I expected it to. I've been officiating youth sports for 30 years, and I've dealt with angry parents before. But something about it, about being publicly called out, made me question whether I was actually good at my job." Karen felt a flutter of guilt. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't apologize," Tom said, "because you actually did me a favor. Your outburst made me more aware of my own performance. It made me review tape of my calls. And I realized that I was, in fact, making mistakes. Mistakes that I could correct if I was willing to work on it." Karen was quiet, processing this. "So I started going to officiating camps," Tom continued. "I got certified at a higher level. I became more rigorous about my own performance, and I'm actually a better official now than I was before. So in a weird way, your anger at me catalyzed something positive in my life." "I'm glad," Karen said, and she meant it. "Also," Tom added, "I watched your documentary and I thought you handled the situation with grace. You could have blamed me or made excuses. Instead, you took responsibility for your behavior. That took guts." After the call, Karen sat at her desk for a long moment. It was strange to think that the worst moment of her parenting journey had actually rippled out and affected other people in positive ways. Not just her son, but the referee, the other parents who'd reached out, the people who'd watched the documentary. It suggested that maybe the story wasn't actually about a mother who went crazy at a basketball game. Maybe the story was about what happens when people are willing to be honest about their failures and then willing to do the work to change. That evening, Karen was home when Meredith, her daughter, called. Meredith lived in another state, working at a marketing agency. She'd been a witness to a lot of her mother's evolution, though she'd been less directly affected by it than Tyler. "Hey, Mom," Meredith said. "I wanted to let you know that I watched the documentary again the other day, and I was thinking about something." "What's that?" Karen asked. "I was thinking about how you were with me when I was a kid," Meredith said. "I don't think you were as intense with me as you were with Tyler, but you were definitely pushing me towards certain things, expecting certain things. And I realized that I've been doing the same thing with my own choices. I've been making decisions based on what I think I'm supposed to want rather than what I actually want." "Oh, honey," Karen said. "Anyway," Meredith continued, "I'm thinking about maybe making a change. Maybe a different job, something that I actually find fulfilling. But I wanted to talk to you first. And I wanted to say thank you for being willing to look at yourself and change. It gave me permission to do the same thing." Karen felt tears come to her eyes. "You don't need my permission to be happy, you know." "I know," Meredith said, "but I wanted to acknowledge that your willingness to change gave me a model for how to do it." After they hung up, Karen sat on the couch next to Michael and just let herself cry for a moment. "What's wrong?" Michael asked, putting an arm around her. "Nothing's wrong," Karen said. "Everything is actually right. That's what's making me emotional." Later that night, Karen found herself looking back through old photos on her phone. There was one from the week of the incident at the basketball game. She was at a tournament, wearing her white tracksuit, sitting in the bleachers with that tense, focused expression on her face. She looked so unhappy, so wound up, so consumed by something that didn't actually matter in the grand scheme of things. Then there was a photo from this past year at Thanksgiving. She was sitting with Michael and Tyler and Meredith, all of them laughing at something someone had said. She looked lighter, happier, more like herself. Karen realized that the incident at the basketball game, which had felt like her rock bottom at the time, had actually been the beginning of her finding her way back to herself. By hitting bottom, she'd been forced to look at who she was and who she wanted to be, and she'd decided to change. It hadn't been easy. It had required therapy, honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to be wrong. It had required sitting with uncomfortable feelings and not numbing them with busyness or achievement. But it had also led her here, to a life where she was successful in her career, present with her family, honest about her mistakes, and committed to continuing to grow. The next day, Karen got an email from a producer. It was a follow-up to the original documentary. The filmmaker wanted to do an update, catching up with Karen 5 years later, seeing where she was now, asking how her life had evolved. Karen read the email twice, and then she called the producer. "I'm in," Karen said. "Let's do it." This time, she was ready to tell the second part of the story. The part about what happened after you hit bottom. The part about slowly building a life that actually fit you, instead of trying to squeeze into someone else's dreams. 7 years after the incident at the basketball game, the follow-up documentary premiered at the same film festival where the original had premiered. It was called The Game We Play, 5 years later. In this new documentary, Karen was seen at her office, where she'd been promoted to Vice President of Development. She was seen mentoring young women in her industry. She was seen at home with her family, genuinely laughing, genuinely present. There was a scene where she was watching one of Tyler's school basketball games. He was playing for fun, not seriously, and the camera caught her face. She was smiling, but not in that tense, evaluative way she used to. She was just enjoying watching her son play a game he loved. In an interview, Karen was asked, "Do you ever wish you'd handled things differently 7 years ago?" "I did handle things differently," Karen said. 7 years ago, I was handling them badly, and then I changed. And that change, as painful as it was, made everything better. The documentary also featured Tyler, now in college, talking about his experience growing up with a parent who was struggling with her own demons. "It was hard," Tyler said. "I remember being anxious at games, knowing my mom was anxious. But I also remember the moment she decided to change. I remember her telling me that she was sorry, that it wasn't about me, that she loved me unconditionally. That moment meant everything." The new documentary didn't make Karen out to be a hero or a villain. It just showed her as a person who'd made mistakes and then spent years trying to correct them. A person who was still trying, still learning, still growing. After the premiere, Karen stood outside the theater talking to the filmmaker. Do you think you've redeemed yourself? The filmmaker asked. Karen thought about it. I don't think redemption is the right word. Redemption implies that you've erased what you did. I can't erase what I did. But I can acknowledge it, learn from it, and be committed to not repeating it. And I can try to help other people avoid the same pitfall. The filmmaker nodded, and Karen recognized the look of someone getting the sound bite they needed. But Karen meant it. That evening, Karen sat down and wrote an email to Derek. She'd stayed in touch with him over the years, and he'd been an important figure in her transformation. But she wanted to put some things in writing. Dear Derek, I've been reflecting on how much your willingness to be honest with me, even when it was uncomfortable, changed my trajectory. You could have just let me continue down the path I was on. You could have avoided the confrontation. But you cared more about doing the right thing than about making me comfortable. I want you to know that I see that now, and I'm grateful for it. I also want to tell you that Tyler is thriving. He's happy. He's found his own path, and he did that because you coached him not to be exceptional but to be himself. Thank you for that. Best, Karen. Derek wrote back. Karen. It was never about Tyler being exceptional. It was about him being human. I'm glad you see that now, and I'm proud of the work you've done to get there. See you at the next game. Derek. A month after the documentary premiered, Karen got a call from a publisher. They wanted her to write a book about her experience, a memoir about becoming the parent she didn't want to be and then finding her way back. Karen said yes. It took her 2 years to write with the help of a ghostwriter. In that time, she lived her life, continued her career, spent time with her family, mentored parents, spoke at conferences. But every day, she carved out time to write about her journey, to be honest about her failures, her motivations, the way she'd tried to live through her children. The book, called The Game We Play, A Mother's Journey from Obsession to Peace, was published to modest success. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found the people who needed it. Parents who recognized themselves in her story. Parents who were scared and pushing too hard and trying to figure out how to stop. The book led to more speaking engagements, more mentoring opportunities. Karen found herself becoming something of a voice in the conversation about youth sports culture and parental involvement. But more importantly, it led to a deeper peace in her own life. Because by writing the story, by examining it from every angle, by being willing to be vulnerable and honest about her own pain, Karen had finally finished processing what had happened. She'd finally transformed the worst moment of her parenting journey into something meaningful. 10 years after the incident at the basketball game, Karen was at her son's college graduation. Tyler had gone to a good school on an academic scholarship. He'd played club basketball for a year before deciding it wasn't his priority. He'd majored in environmental science with a minor in debate. He was smart, kind, thoughtful, and genuinely happy. Karen sat in the stands watching him walk across the stage, and she felt a profound gratitude. Not because he'd turned out exceptionally, he hadn't, and that was fine, but because he'd turned out himself, fully, authentically, joyfully himself. That night at the graduation party, Karen found herself talking with Tom Caldwell, the referee who'd reached out to her years ago. They'd stayed in touch, and he'd become something of a friend. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" he said. "I know," Karen said. "Sometimes I think about that game, about that moment when I shouted at you, and it feels like a lifetime ago, like it happened to a different version of me." "Maybe it did," Tom said. "Maybe that version of you needed to exist so that this version could come into being." Karen smiled. It was a kind way to think about it. She left the party and drove home alone, the evening settling into a soft darkness around her. She thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago, anxious, ambitious, desperate to prove something through her child. She thought about the journey that had led her from that moment to this one. She thought about the fact that the worst moment of her parenting career had actually been the beginning of the best part. The part where she'd finally grown up, where she'd finally accepted her own limitations and disappointments, where she'd finally learned to love her children for who they were, not for what they could accomplish. It was strange, the way life worked, the way tragedy could become transformation if you were willing to do the work. Karen pulled into her driveway and turned off the car. She sat for a moment in the quiet darkness, just breathing. And then she went inside to her life, her real, imperfect, fully human life, and she was grateful. Because in the end, the game that mattered wasn't basketball. The game was learning how to love without control, learning how to hope without demanding, learning how to be a parent without making your children responsible for your own redemption. And Karen had finally learned to play it.